This video is to review solving quadratic equations by the quadratic formula. And I just want to talk a little bit about vocabulary. I also talked about this in the solving quadratic equations by factoring and by graphing video. But the vocabulary here is important. You'll be asked to find the roots or the solutions or the x-intercepts or to solve the equations, and all of this vocabulary means exactly the same thing. And again, you have three different things at your disposal. You can either solve by graphing or by factoring, and if factoring doesn't work, then you always have the quadratic formula. You can always fall back on that. It's just important to highlight all three of these methods so that you're comfortable with all of them. One thing that I always suggest is that no matter what, whenever you can, is to graph something and get an idea of what it looks like, because more often than not, you're able to rule out a couple of answer choices on the SOL. So at least you've got it down to a 50-50. I also did want to talk about here the difference between a quadratic with two real solutions, one real solution, and no real solutions, because that really comes into play when we're talking about your quadratic formula. So if you've graphed it and you see what it looks like, you should see whether you're quadratic, what types of solutions you're going to have. And a lot of times when you are going the route of your quadratic formula, you might encounter something with an imaginary solution, and you might already be expecting to go that route with your quadratic formula and be expecting imaginary solutions. So we have three examples we're going to talk about today. This is your quadratic formula, which you probably know fairly well. It isn't something that you have to memorize. It is on your formula sheet, but you do need to know how to use it. This is the equation that we're going to solve. What we do need to do here is distribute our -2 first. So -2x squared. -2 times the -4x is a positive 8x. -2 times a positive 3 is -6 is equal to -7 plus x squared. And then what we must remember is that in order to be able to apply the quadratic formula, that we have to get this equation equal to 0. So we have to get all of our terms over to one side. So the first thing I'm going to do here is just add my 7 to both sides. So 2x squared plus 8x plus 1 is equal to x squared. And then I'm going to, that was a -2x. I'm also going to subtract this x squared from both sides, so that I have -3x squared plus 8x plus 1 is equal to 0. So now I'm able to plug all of my coefficients into my quadratic formula. What's important to know is that my first number is A, my second number is B, and my third number is C. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that here in my formula. So I know it's the opposite of B, so -8 plus or minus the square root of 8 squared minus 4 times -3 times C, which is 1, all over 2 times A, which is -3. Now what I recommend doing from here is everything that's underneath your radical, typing it into your calculator just as you see it. I do recommend writing this part out first, but then typing in 8 squared minus 4 times -3 times 1, and this should give you 76. You are going to want to make sure that you are not making a sign mistake here. Sometimes that can be the biggest mistake of all. And that's why I recommend, once you have everything written out, type in 8 squared minus 4 times -3 times 1. And then get to this step here. And then 2 times -3 is -6. Don't try to do the whole thing in your calculator. That can be too difficult. Now, once you get to this part, you have a couple of options. You can see that none of your answer choices are imaginary. So you can see that you don't have any answer choices that are this one. What you're expected to do is to be able to reduce this radical. I'm going to walk you through that. But one thing that you can do is you can try to get a decimal equivalent for this and see which of these equal that. That can also be a little bit tricky. So what I recommend is just knowing how to reduce your radicals. So you're trying to see what is the largest square root, or the largest perfect square that goes into 76. And it doesn't take very long to get there. It's actually 4. 4 times 19 is what gives you 76. If you need to review reducing radicals, there is a video on that. So make sure you look at that. But this is negative 8 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 19 over negative 6. Now what you should notice here is that all 3 of these terms can be divided by 2. So what we're going to do here is divide them all by 2. But what happens here, because of this plus or minus and this negative, and this is a negative and a negative, these are both going to become positive. Okay, so we are going to get 4 plus or minus the square root of 19 over 3. And you can see that that's answer choice A here. And once you got it down to the square root of 19, you should have been able to see that that was going to be answer choice A. So being able to reduce that radical is really important. We have another example here. This one is going to take us a few more steps to get down to our quadratic. Again, we do need to distribute this 2. So negative 2, we have negative 6x squared plus 4x. And we have 2x squared terms on this side that we're going to combine. And it's going to be 7 positive 1x squared minus 2x squared. It's going to leave us with minus 1x squared. So I'm going to add my x squared here first. So I have 5 minus 5x squared plus 4x is equal to 7. And then I'm going to subtract my 7. So I get negative 2 minus 5x squared plus 4x is equal to 0. Now what's important to note about this problem is you can't say this is your A, this is your B, and this is your C. It has to be written in standard form, which means we have to write it in order of decreasing exponents. So negative 5x squared has to come first, plus 4x minus 2 equals 0. So negative 5 is our A, 4 is our B, and negative 2 is our C. So here's our quadratic equation, or our quadratic formula, excuse me. So negative B plus or minus the square root of 4 squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2 times negative 5. So negative 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 24 all over negative 10. So negative 24 reduces to be 2I square root of 6. So you can see here that this one isn't as easy because all of them have the square root of 6 on the inside. So we really have to see how we're going to be able to split these things up. But you can see that the 4, the 2, and the 10 can all be divisible by 2. And sometimes what I suggest is that if you have a hard time being able to simplify this, to split each part of the fraction up at the plus or minus sign. So what I mean by that is to write it as negative 4 over negative 10, and then write plus or minus 2i square root of 6 over negative 10. So what you're simplifying is negative 4 over negative 10, which simplifies to be 2 over 5, plus or minus. Now this plus or minus sign takes care of that negative 10, so you don't really have to worry about that sign. So 2 over 10 is 1 over 5, so you have I square root of 6 over 5. So we would put that together as 2 plus or minus I square root of 6 over 5, which is answer choice C. Alright, and the third problem we're going to take a look at is actually a real world problem. A model rocket is launched into the air at an initial velocity of 80 feet per second using the formula 80t minus 1/2 32t squared. Determine how long it will take the rocket to return to ground level. So if you think about a rocket being launched up in the air, coming back down, when will it return to ground level? What that's asking you is when will this equation equal 0? So 0 equals 80t minus 1/2 32t squared. So basically what we're doing is we're able to solve this using the quadratic formula. What we're going to want to do here, first of all, is multiply that negative 1/2 times that 32, which gives us negative 16. And we also have to write this in order. So negative 16t squared plus 80t. Now what's important to know here is that there is no c value. C is equal to 0. So if we're using our quadratic formula, c is equal to 0 because there wasn't one in our equation. So negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So this gives us negative 80 plus or minus 80 all over negative 32. So if we break this apart into two equations, okay, equation 1, negative 80 plus 80 over negative 32 gives us 0. So that's over here. That's the first place it's on the ground. That's when the rocket hasn't been launched at all. Okay, but we want to know when is it going to return to the ground after it's been launched in the air and it comes back down. So that means we have to do the other part of the equation, negative 80 minus 80 over negative 32. And that actually gives us 5 seconds. And another strategy for solving this problem is, as long as you can think about it, when will it return to the ground? When will it equal 0? If you graph this on your calculator, you should be able to at least eliminate these two answer choices. Go from there. You could also consult the table, and you would see that it does equal 5 seconds. So you have a lot of things at your disposal here. It's just important to be able to think about when it hits the ground, that means the equation is equal to 0. If you have more questions about solving quadratic equations by the quadratic formula, please see your math teacher.